Your things are in the hall. That was it. No scene. No raised voice. Just Maureen Voss standing at the top of the staircase in her cream cashmere cardigan, holding a glass of white wine, speaking to her stepdaughter like she was telling the housekeeper to take out the recycling. Zara didn't scream back. She was 22 years old, had spent 3 years in the Canadian Armed Forces before a medical discharge that nobody in that house ever asked about, and she had learned a long time ago that screaming was what people did when they thought noise could change something. She looked up at Maureen. She looked at the glass. She said nothing. The hall bag was a large rolling suitcase, not hers. Maureen had packed it herself. Zara could tell because everything in it had been folded the wrong way. Her service hoodie stuffed underneath a pair of dress pants she hadn't worn since her father's funeral, and the small cedar box that had belonged to her grandmother was not inside. She went back to the foot of the stairs. The cedar box. Maureen took a slow sip of her wine. I don't know what you're referring to. It was on my dresser. It's been on my dresser for years. There's nothing in that room that belongs to you. There were a lot of things Zara could have said to that. She had been living in that house since she was 17. Had moved in after her father Clement Addo remarried. Had painted that room herself with the leftover gray-blue paint Clement kept in the garage. Had carried her grandmother's cedar box across 3 provinces in a backpack when she first came to stay. But she had also learned, in places that made Maureen Voss look like a minor inconvenience, that some arguments were not arguments. They were just someone telling you what they had already decided. She picked up the suitcase handle. She left. Now, here is the parts people always ask about. How do you walk out of a house at 22 with a single suitcase and not, and this is important, not fall apart on the driveway? The honest answer is that she had done harder things. She had been 20 years old on a base in Ottawa, Ontario, running drills in -20 weather with wet socks and a pulled hamstring. And she had learned that the body has an extraordinary ability to keep going when the alternative is stopping. She stood on the driveway. She looked at the house. Then she called her friend Dominique, who lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Ottawa's Vanier neighborhood, and who had twice before offered her the couch. "Tonight?" Dominique said. "If you still have the couch." "I never got rid of the couch. That was that. Here is what you need to understand about Clement Addo and why any of this matters. He was the kind of man who was very warm in the way that men sometimes are when they don't want to look at difficult things. He loved Zara. That part was true. He came to her graduation. He framed her service photo and put it on the mantel before Maureen quietly moved it to the hallway. He called every Sunday for 2 years and always asked about her knee, about her sleep, about whether she was eating enough. But he had also married Maureen Glassner, Maureen Voss by her first marriage, Maureen Addo by her second, 2 years after Zara's mother passed. And he had arranged his life around that woman's comfort in the way that some people do when they are lonely and grateful for someone to take care of things. Maureen took care of things, the dinners, the house in Westboro, the social calendar, the slow, careful management of Clement's attention, until Zara was something he fit in on Sundays. Clement died in March. A cardiac event, the doctor said, which is a phrase designed to make an ending sound like a calendar appointment. He was 61. He had not updated his will since Maureen had moved in. Zara did not inherit the house. She inherited the debt on a car she didn't know existed, a watch she never received, and the information, delivered by a notary in a too-small office on Spark Street, that the house, the savings, and the contents thereof had passed to Maureen, with a discretionary provision for personal items to be distributed at her sole discretion. Discretionary. Sole discretion. The cedar box had been her grandmother's. It had come over from Ghana with her mother's mother, who had carried it in a cloth bag on a plane in 1971. It held nothing valuable in any official sense. A folded photograph. A letter in Twi that Zara couldn't fully read, but could feel, a small wooden comb. Maureen had decided that these things, too, fell under her sole discretion. The 2 years after are worth telling, even if they're faster to live through than to explain. Dominique's couch for 3 months. A sublet in Gatineau for 6 months after that. A second job working dispatch for a logistics company. In addition to the personal security contract work that had started as a one-off when a colleague referred her to a corporate client and had quietly, steadily grown into something she was good at and in demand for. There is a particular kind of competence that comes from training under pressure, from learning to read a room, a person, a situation, faster than most people read a menu. Zara had that. Companies learned to call her private clients. A family office in Toronto, an executive in Calgary who needed discreet protection during a difficult litigation period. She charged what the work was worth. She saved what she didn't need. She moved to Toronto. She didn't think about the house. She didn't think about Maureen. She had a rule about putting energy into things that couldn't be changed, and Maureen was a thing that couldn't be changed. The house was gone. The cedar box was gone. Her father was gone. She kept the Sunday habit of calling someone who cared about her, transferred now to her aunt in Mississauga, and she kept going. She turned 25, 26. She took a contract in Vancouver that ran 14 months and changed the shape of her professional life. She turned 27. She came back to Toronto with more money than she had ever had, and a reputation that meant she didn't have to explain herself in rooms anymore. People already knew who she was before she arrived. She found the Westboro house listing by accident. This is the kind of sentence that sounds convenient when you write it down, but that is genuinely how it happened. She was in Ottawa for a client meeting, staying at a hotel on Bank Street, and she was doing what you do when you're in a city you used to live in, looking at the neighborhood on her phone, checking what had changed, the way you touch a bruise to see if it still hurts. The listing came up in an auto-populated real estate feed she hadn't signed up for and had never managed to turn off. The house was in pre-foreclosure. She stared at that for a while. She knew what pre-foreclosure meant. It meant the bank had started proceedings. It meant whoever was holding the mortgage had fallen behind. It meant the house was, technically, acquirable if you moved quickly and knew what you were doing. She called Dominique. The Westboro house is going into foreclosure. A pause on the line. Maureen's house. My father's house. Another pause. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I want to make an offer. Zara. I know. You know what you know? I know what I know. Dominique was quiet for a moment. Then, do you have enough? I have enough. She did not tell anyone what she was doing. She hired a real estate lawyer. A firm on Elgin Street she'd used before for a different matter. And she made the offer through them, under a numbered company she had set up in Ontario for her business contracts. The transaction took 11 weeks. The bank accepted. The price was below market, which is how foreclosures work, and which is not something Zara felt conflicted about. She had spent enough time thinking about what was and wasn't fair in that house to have used up that particular supply of conflict. She signed the documents in early October. The lawyer emailed her the confirmation. She went back to her Toronto apartment and cooked the jollof her aunt had taught her, and sat at the kitchen table and read the document 3 times. She was 29 years old. She was, on paper, the owner of the house where she had been told, in a voice like a woman ordering a second glass of wine, that her things were in the hall. She didn't call anyone that night. She sat with it. The letter she sent to the current occupants was formal. Her lawyer's firm sent it, which meant it arrived on letterhead, which meant it looked like exactly what it was. A notice from a new ownership entity, requesting that the occupants contact the management company to discuss their tenancy status and any potential lease arrangements within 30 days. It said nothing else. It did not say who the owner was. Maureen Voss called the management company number the following Tuesday. The management company was a real one. A property manager, Zara, had contracted to handle the administrative side of things. A woman named Colette, who ran a clean, professional operation out of a shared office in Centertown, and who knew only that her client was a private owner who preferred not to be involved in initial tenant communications. Colette handled the call. Maureen asked about the lease terms. Colette explained that the new owner would be happy to arrange a month-to-month tenancy at a rate in line with current Westboro market rents, which had, in the years since Clement's funeral, increased in a way that could charitably be described as significant. Maureen asked to speak with the owner directly. Colette said she'd pass the request along. They met in the living room of the house on a Thursday afternoon in November. Zara had driven from Toronto the night before. She had slept at Dominique's. In the morning, she had made herself coffee and sat at Dominique's kitchen table for a long time without saying much. Dominique did not push her. That is one of the things about a real friendship. You don't have to explain the long silences. Zara wore the thing she wore to every professional meeting. Dark trousers, a good coat, nothing she had to think about. She drove to the house. She parked on the street. She sat in the car for a moment and looked at the front porch, at the iron railing, at the window of the room that had once been hers, and was now. She had confirmed this through Colette, used as an office. She went inside. Maureen was in the living room. Maureen's son, Trevor, was there too, standing near the fireplace with his arms crossed in the way of men who are not sure if they're needed, but want to be visibly present. Trevor had not grown up in that house. He had grown up with his father, visited on long weekends, taken Clement's car once without asking, and been described by Maureen on multiple occasions as very protective of family. Zara had her own description for Trevor, but kept it private. When Zara walked into the living room, Maureen looked at her and went very still. To her credit, she didn't pretend not to recognize her. "You bought this house," Maureen said. It was not a question. "I did. How?" The question came out flat. No inflection. The same voice she used to say, "Your things are in the hall." "I worked," Zara said. "I saved. The bank had a process. I followed it." Maureen sat down in the chair that had always been Clement's chair. Zara noticed this. She didn't say anything about it. Trevor said, "You can't just," and then stopped, because the sentence had nowhere good to go. "I own the property," Zara said. "If you'd like to remain as tenants, the management company can send you a lease. Colette has already outlined the terms. If that doesn't work for you, I can provide 30 days' notice of vacant possession, which is standard." She said this the way she said everything in professional rooms. Not unkind, not warm, clear. "You're doing this to hurt us," Trevor said. Zara looked at him. She had been looked at by harder people in worse rooms, and she had learned that the most effective thing was to look back without changing your expression. "I'm doing this because I own the house," she said. "What you do with that information is up to you." Maureen said nothing for a long moment. The house was quiet in the way it had always been quiet. Good insulation, double-pane windows, the hum of the furnace from the basement. Zara had grown up with that hum. Then Maureen said, in a voice that was quieter than Zara had ever heard from her, "Your father would not have wanted this." Zara thought about her father, about the Sundays, about the mantle, about the notary's office and the phrase sole discretion, and the cedar box that she still had not been given back. "My father," she said, "wanted a lot of things he didn't make happen. That's not something I can fix for him now." She said it without anger. That was the part that mattered. She had decided a long time ago, standing on a driveway in Westboro with a rolling suitcase that wasn't hers, that she was not going to carry the anger. Not because Maureen didn't deserve it, but because anger, when you hold it that long, starts to belong to you instead of the person who caused it. And Zara had decided that woman was not getting anything else from her. Not her peace, not her energy, not her years. She was getting her grandmother's house back. That was enough. She found the cedar box in the third-floor storage room, behind a set of skis that had never been used and a box of Clement's old documents. It was exactly where she had mentally filed it. In the category of things Maureen didn't want but wouldn't give back, which is a very specific kind of cruelty and very recognizable if you have been on the receiving end of it. She picked it up. It was lighter than she remembered. She opened it in the storage room, alone, with the gray November light coming through the small round window that had always faced north toward the park. The photograph was still there, the letter in twi, the small wooden comb. She stood there for a minute, maybe longer. She wasn't measuring time. Maureen and Trevor did not take the lease. They vacated in January. Zara did not move back into the house. That surprised some people when they heard the full story later, which they did, because Dominique told the story to enough people that it moved through a certain circle of Ottawa and Toronto and became one of those things that gets retold at kitchen tables and long dinners. Not as gossip, exactly, but as the kind of story people tell because it satisfies something they need satisfied. What Zara did with the house was convert it into 2 rental units. Good ones. She hired a contractor she trusted, kept the original woodwork on the main floor, updated the kitchen in the upper unit. She rented both units within 3 weeks to tenants who paid on time and took care of the place. She hired Colette to manage it. She went back to Toronto. There is a woman in Vanier, a single mother with 2 kids, whose name is not part of this story, but who is the kind of person who holds her shoulders like she's waiting for the next thing to go wrong. Who is now one of Zara's tenants in a different building, a 4-unit walk-up in Hintonburg that Zara added to her portfolio 2 years after the Westboro house. That building was in worse shape than the Westboro property and needed more work, and was, by any objective measure, a bigger risk. She bought it anyway. She fixed it up anyway. She charges rents below what she could legally get because she has done the math on what is sustainable and what is extractive. And she made a decision about which side of that line she wanted to be on. These things are related. The cedar box, the rolling suitcase, the woman in Hintonburg who holds her shoulders like she's waiting. You have to decide early what your wins are for, what you're building toward, because it is very easy, if you're not careful, to spend so much energy becoming the person who survives the hard thing that you forget to decide what the person who survives does next. Zara decided. She went back to the house one more time, after the renovation was complete, and the tenants had moved in before she drove back to Toronto. She told herself it was to do a final walkthrough. That was half true. The other half she didn't explain to herself out loud. She walked through the main floor. The contractor had done good work. The kitchen was open now, where the old wall had been, and the light came through differently. Better, she thought. She walked down the hall. She went upstairs. She stopped at the door of the small room on the left. The room she had painted gray-blue with leftover paint from the garage. The room where the cedar box had sat on the dresser for 4 years. It was a bedroom again now, not an office. The new tenant's child had already put a drawing on the wall with a piece of tape. A house with a yellow sun, the kind of drawing children have been making forever. She looked at it for a moment. Then she went back downstairs, through the front hallway, and out the front door. She pulled it shut behind her. She stood on the porch with her hand on the iron railing and looked out at the street, at the bare November trees, at the park at the end of the block where she used to walk in the morning before anyone else was up. She let herself have that, the street, the trees, the quiet. Then she got in the car and she drove home.